everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Logistics with Podcast. We're going to go a little bit interstellar on this episode. So we usually cover things that are happening on the ground, and this time, which we've done, I think only once before, we're going to hit you with a topic that's coming from space, which of course is a huge topic right now. And I have been following this organization for a while, so I am delighted to talk to Aisha said, Director of Human Experience at Space for Humanity. Space for Humanity. So they may not be the ones that are all over the news at this point, but we're going to tell you more about them soon, and you're going to want to listen in because it's going to be a really fun conversation. And just Aisha's story in general is really exciting, and all you travelers out there are going to get something out of that as well. So first of all, Aisha, welcome. It's so good to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, before we get into all the exciting adventures that you're up to, just to get us started, I want to answer or ask some quick questions, and you're just going to respond with the first thing that comes to mind, okay?
You bet.
Okay. So, main thing you do to start the morning and to start with energy.
A strong cup of coffee
Mm-hmm.
and the classic Lebanese singer Fairuz.
Wow. Okay. All right. I may have to come back to that one later then. That's awesome. Your best skill.
Problem solving.
Good one. Favorite movie?
Can I do a series?
Sure.
The American Office. I love it.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I'm with you there. A quote that you live by?
Be the change you want to see every day.
Hmm. And favorite planet or star?
For sure, hands down, Mars.
Okay. Okay. We'll talk more about that soon. So before I go on, do you identify with one character in The Office more than the others?
No, I just see myself a fly on the wall,
Yes.
and I just love the shenanigans they get up
Yes.
to.
Absolutely. I agree. It would be a blast, but also I would rather be a fly on the wall than actually having to work there, I think. Um, so thank you so much for those answers. Fascinating. We'll probably come back to a few of those as well. But before we get into what's current, let's talk about your background. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up in your childhood.
You bet. So I was born in Ottawa, Ontario, the capital city of Canada, big bustling city. And then when I was 7 years old, we moved to northern Alberta, Canada. Very small, very remote, a hamlet, so really isolated. My mom worked on the reservation in this very, very small town, and it was, looking back on it, such a blessing because I grew up around a lot of traditional Indigenous influence.
Mhm.
Um, you never think about how isolation really creates community. And of course, in those times, to date myself, we didn't have the internet. And so the toys you had were, handful. You couldn't acquire many, like a new set of toys. Wow, that was Christmas and like very exciting. So, I think my love of problem solving really came from having only a few things to kind of rejig and create new and exciting games with my friends,
Mhm.
and also being outside in nature and having no fear of the outdoors was such a
Mhm.
unique experience growing up.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, I've been close to Ottawa. I haven't been there before. Haven't been any higher than Edmonton. So, I definitely, and of course, we're recording this in mid-October. We just had a phenomenal Northern Lights experience across the US. So, I imagine you got to see some of that as well.
Oh yeah, growing up all the time we had Northern Lights. And actually, it's believed that if you rub your fingers together, the Northern Lights dance for you.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind
So
next time.
next time, yeah, rub your little fingers together.
Okay, I'll do that. And then, as you mentioned, so the reservation, very interesting, unique experience. So I'm sure there's probably a story from that time that helped shaped who you are, what you do now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think I was lucky that in my 20s I kind of sat back and really digested and reflected a lot. But growing up at that time, there was so much in your face racism that
Mm,
happened. So in northern Alberta, it's an oil and gas town.
Okay.
And so we had a lot of people coming in for the oil rigs and really coming in with a mentality, that um, had overt racism attached to
Mm.
it. The region had also been ravaged by residential schools. And so, that's when the policy was to take children from parents to re-educate. So this had really left the region in a lot of ways scarred, but
Mhm.
at the same time, coming together as community. And there was, so much rich cultural heritage. And so I felt like I was nestled within that, but
Mhm.
at the same time, hyper aware of the politics that surrounded me.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask. A lot of times when we're kids, we don't recognize, like, if we're in a unique situation or something interesting is happening around us, it's just kind of this is who you are and what you live with every day. So you did recognize it for what it was.
Well, I'm biracial. My dad is East African and my mom is European Canadian. And there was not a lot of multiculturalism in Northern Alberta. However, there was very much a lot of, the kids in the school. Um, some kids wouldn't play with me because they thought I was Indigenous.
Mm.
Some kids thought, oh, her mom's white, so she must be white. So there was a lot of politics that the kids brought in from what they heard at the
Yeah,
dinner table. And so my mom, being a social worker and also seeing this go on, really tried to walk me through it, especially surrounding creating an identity because it's so hard to navigate when there's just such in your face
sure.
racism that you grow up around.
Yeah, absolutely. And your mom, I'm sure, taught you some valuable lessons as well. And I'm sure that was a very fulfilling and challenging career that she had in social work as well. What did she see positive changes, I hope, happen?
It's interesting. I get so much from my mom. She was a original hippie. Okay, left home, traveled to Northern Canada before we went up. She had, as a teenager, lived up north and just fell in love with the people and the culture. And, I really believe her heart was just in Northern Alberta. She loved it up there.
Oh, that's awesome. It is a beautiful, beautiful place. So speaking of Canada, you actually graduated from the University of Calgary, earning a bachelor's degree in international development studies, makes a lot of sense in what you just said, and then pursued a Bachelor of Education in inclusive education, which I didn't even know was something that you could major in. So, but also sounds very fitting with how you grew up. So what were you planning to do at that time?
Well, I knew I was just really curious about the injustice in the world and how education was a key that opened up so many doors and an elusive key. Like it was kind of tossed to some people, other people had to find it. And so that's why I took that degree in international development studies. And I was curious about learning and how best to teach and how people learn best and traditional ways of knowing. And so I took that second degree in education, not wanting to be a classroom teacher, but really wanting to know how people tick and how they learn. And interestingly enough, it was a 2 year after degree. And I thought, I'll go into social studies. I've traveled a lot, love a map, love a little history. And I'll tell you what, I just couldn't sit through the lecture. I was so bored. And so someone said, well, you love a challenge. You're a problem solver. Why don't you look into inclusive education?
Mm,
And so fell in love from the first moment because it is so complicated and so important. So we're looking at linguistic differences, cultural
okay.
differences, physical and cognitive,
Wow.
and really tweaking the lesson, tweaking the delivery so that every learner feels like they're attaining success,
Mm,
loves the day, is having fun, and, long gone are the days of the special education room. Instead, it's on the teacher to create an environment where everyone can find their footing.
right. Wow. I think I wish that more and more teachers could go through something like that. It sounds like an incredible program and incredible time to learn. And of course, um, the education system does not change very quickly. And so that sounds like it could be a huge benefit to others. What did you learn from? So there's also the dynamics of not wanting people to have a separate space, to want them to feel included, but of course, then also trying to manage so many dynamics within a classroom setting. So, what are some takeaways from that you learned about key learning styles, either challenges or opportunities?
Yeah, something that I learned is that, and I think that this talks to my upbringing as well, is that we need to go back and really study traditional ways of learning
Mhm.
and really acknowledge that a classroom is an institution.
Mhm.
And so, no kidding, it's really tricky when you shove 30, 35 kids in a
Yeah.
room and you expect everyone to have a great time
Right.
with the rows of desks, right? And so I'm a really big proponent of a flexible learning environment, of many teachers teaching at the same time,
Mm.
right? They say it takes a village, but when we actually break it down and we have a few teachers in the room and we have a bigger space and we have some flexible learning environments, you really start seeing the success. And you also are able to, it's not about separating to another classroom, but sometimes you do need to pull someone aside and one-on-one have some more direct learning, break things down differently, and that's okay. Um, but in a rigid classroom, really hard logistically to do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And what do you mean by multiple people teaching at the same time?
Yeah, so, we can have many adults in a room.
Okay.
And so, what I love to see is maybe someone who specializes in language.
Hmm.
And so they're over reading a book. You've got someone else talking about numbers, patterns, shapes, a mathematics specialist, somewhere else. Um, I think people are overwhelmed by the idea of kind of like breaking down the walls
Yeah.
in a school. But the only real lesson for kids is like, the tone of the voice.
Hmm.
And once you get that down, you can really have different learning centers and different little hubs and areas where you've got different teachers all teaching at the same time. And so, yeah, that's an idea that really excites me.
Yeah, I think that sounds very cool and very collaborative. And of course, back to your upbringing, sounds very community driven. So it makes a lot of sense as well. Well, you did end up doing some teaching. You were in Mexico and China and Dubai. You just talked about your travel experiences. Tell us more about that. So you did end up going into teaching for a while.
Yeah, exactly. I knew that I couldn't talk about pedagogy and how people learn if I didn't take the time to teach. And I knew I needed to do it internationally because I
Mm.
also wanted that experience. And so, yeah, I actually started in my first degree. I didn't even have my learning or my teaching credentials. And I taught in Mexico. I taught in Kenya, came back to Canada, finished my degree, taught in Macau, China for a few years, taught in Dubai. And something that I really learned was that kids are the exact same no matter where you go. They
Yeah.
just want to have fun, you know? And parents are the exact same as well. They want their kids to be happy, to be safe, to feel fulfilled.
Hmm.
Um, People get really caught up by, our differences. And it's really important that we take the time to understand our differences, right? Those intercultural communication skills, so important,
Yeah.
not to be missed. But at the end of the day, we've got so much more in common than we have in difference.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. And is there something that the education system in one of those countries was doing that you would really like to see brought to other places?
Ooh, I mean, each one had a little gem to it.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's something really magical about my first school in Mexico because they just let me run with it.
Mm.
They had some pedagogy that they needed ticked off, but they were really open.
Yeah.
And so I did so many really cool things with the kids, talking about, um, learning about different cultures, learning about um, the world around us, really hands-on learning. That I think that other schools that are a little bit more, um, set in their ways can be a little bit rigid in
Sure.
letting a teacher just kind of run with what the kids find interesting and doing that exploration.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds really cool. What an amazing experience. You're currently in Egypt. Have you picked up languages in, or at least phrases in all of these different places? Do you speak multiple languages?
So I became fluent in Spanish in Mexico.
Okay.
Um, Again, truly dating myself. We had no Google Translate. I had a little notebook and I taught two classes, grade 3 and grade 6, and I had only one student who spoke English. Also, the other teachers, it was rural Mexico. A lot
Yeah.
of the teachers didn't speak English either. So I would ask the student on her lunch break to come to my classroom, and I would be like, okay, how do I say this?
Yeah.
Or I heard this.
Wow.
What does this mean? Um, and it was that true immersion,
Mm-hmm.
and it happened really quick. But I was also like 19,
Yeah.
so I was a sponge. As you mentioned, right now I'm in Egypt, trying so hard to learn Egyptian Arabic.
Yes.
Um, have a bit of a time scramble because I have a 1-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
So as long as I learn just a little before him, then
That's
I'm
true.
doing okay.
Or he can just teach you
Oh,
himself.
exactly.
That's awesome. I was talking to a friend the other day, and she was talking about when she broke down, her car broke down in another country, but her kids had grown up there and could speak it. So she was having to use them as translators to get the car fixed and towed and all of those kind of little things. So yes, it's amazing to be able to pick it up when you're young. And so many beautiful languages that you've been around too, and beautiful cultures. What are some of your favorite cultural traditions that you've seen?
Oh, wow. I could just go on and on and on.
The
Um,
first one that popped into your mind.
well, when I was in Kenya, I think there was so much to learn. I also didn't work at a school. I was working at different orphanages.
Okay.
And so traditional education, traditional learning really interests me. And so there was a lot of teaching children about the different tribes, maybe that they belonged to, maybe not, maybe they knew the tribe they came from, maybe they
Mhm.
didn't if they were an orphan. But there was house mamas.
Oh,
And I saw the house mamas as the most important person at the school. Like,
yeah.
forget about the principal, forget about the teachers, certainly forget about me. These house mamas, because they were teaching life skills, how
Mm,
to do their laundry. They would, tell stories and also traditional stories of different tribes. And um, uh, tribalism is something also that certain parts of the world really connect with, and it can be really unifying. And so teaching that to children in a modern way really fascinates me.
yes, absolutely. Well, I know we could spend forever just talking about your travel and the things that you've learned, but let's also, of course, spend a little time on space for humanity, which is why we're here. Tell us, it is not, the space is on, I feel like everybody's, all the news cycles right now, it's in the news all the time. It's something that's going on. But Space for Humanity might not be as well known yet. So tell us the origin story and your mission.
You bet. So, Space for Humanity is an American nonprofit, and we have the planet's first sponsored citizen astronaut program. So, we're sending regular civilians to space. It was founded in 2017 by Dylan Taylor with the mission to send 10,000 diverse people in the next 10 years to space, with the idea that, space travel can change perception, it can democratize access, and improve the state of the world.
Mm, okay. So democratize access, that is definitely something that we're seeing you all take a lead in. It's something we've seen on the news right now until very recently. You mentioned 2017, and if, until recently, it has been dominated, which seemed rightly so by people who have studied, and done these test missions and everything for decades. So how long is the training? How long does the trip last? How do you democratize something that seems like it would take some specialized skill?
Very good questions. All very good questions. So right now we have the advancement of commercial space flight. And so those space providers are looking to send people to space. It's a very limited trip,
Mm,
um, but we still have astronauts who are going out for scientific research, for different mission specific purpose, or maybe to spend some time at the ISS. Now, you can still be a visitor and a
mhm,
paying civilian, but these different vessels that are taking people are now able to say, okay, it's a short duration suborbital space flight, and we can open the door because we're not up there for like months at a time. You're up there for maybe 10 to 15 minutes.
okay.
And so now the barrier to entry is a lot lower because things such as health metrics,
Hmm.
they can open the door. Of course, they have chief medical officers that give the final okay. But at the end of the day, we're seeing people in their 90s flying. And so the risk is a lot lower, and it's really opening the door for many more people to have that experience.
Incredible. How many missions have you done so far?
So we've sent two people to space.
Okay.
Katia Ekazareta, the first Mexican-born woman, and Sarah Sabri, the first Egyptian to go to space and the first Middle Eastern woman and African woman to go to space.
Wow. Um, Incredible. As we've kind of been discussing, it's on actually mentioned on your website to expand access to space for all of humanity. You're talking about diversity and inclusion. You just talked about some major firsts that have been happening. What is your criteria? How do people apply? Asking not just for a friend because I've applied as well. So it's time to give us all the scoop.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty because I feel like I lose people right at the moment of we send people to space.
Right.
And
Yes.
they're like, why? What's so important about this?
Right.
Well, we've got a program where we're saying to people, okay, we're going to send leaders to space who want to make change. So we look at three criteria.
Okay.
We look at their leadership, community development, and impact.
Mm.
Because once they go up to space and they have this overview effect, so seeing the Earth from above, we know that there's a cognitive shift that kind of changes perception and this acceleration in big problem solving. We've
Mhm.
seen scientists come back to Earth and now flip to wanting to do philanthropy and be change makers. And
Mm.
so the idea is we're sending people we already know have high scores in being change makers to go up, have this inspirational experience,
Mhm.
come back down, and we say to them, okay, now we're asking you to do a year-long impact project.
Mm.
We create it together. We look for impact markers. So we really know there's going to be change, lasting change here on Earth. And we ask them to do that for 1 year post-flight.
Okay. Fantastic. Oh, that is amazing. And very cool to see it isn't just 10 to 15 minutes. It is a lasting impact beyond that. Along those lines, also on your website, you have, we believe our future in space will be determined by who we resolve to be on Earth today. Very powerful statement. And you talk about the overview effect and how it impacts astronauts' lives. So explain the overview effect. I think you just started talking about it there, and explain more about that statement.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, we believe that the world's biggest problems are all solvable, but they're human problems.
Mm.
And so they need people to come back down to earth, who have this new kind of inspirational um, second set of eyes, if you will. And so the overview effect, in its essence, is changing your paradigm shift or giving you a paradigm shift. And so we want leaders to go up, come back down to earth, and then relook at the world's biggest problems.
Mm. Good.
Now, we really don't want this to be a joyride, and that's why we have the
Yeah.
criteria, the leadership, community development, and impact. We want everyone to go to space, but in our program, we want people who are really dedicated to coming back down to earth and creating lasting change.
Mm. And how do you envision space travel influencing our understanding of humanity's place in the universe? I can, I think we kind of all heard the stories of, you get such a different perspective when you're looking down at Earth and you have automatically more empathy and more understanding of you're a little piece in such a big place. What have you seen? How have you chosen to look at that?
What I hear from people, I haven't had the experience myself yet, fingers
Yet.
crossed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. But there is this now undeniable rush to create change for the world. When you can see it as such a small, fragile planet from a different perspective, there's this like, oh, we need to protect this.
Mm.
We need to do change now and stop with, hoeing and humming and theoretical change. No, it's practical change. And I think something else is really important to note is that, going off world and
Mm-hmm.
just that perspective shift, you're now looking down on everything you've ever known, everyone you've ever loved or will love,
Mm.
all housed in this just very fragile planet. So it's this knee-jerk reaction of like, I'm going to create change. I'm going to do it right now. And Katya Ekazareta, I remember her talking to me about this, and she had always been making change, and that's why she was selected. But she came back down and she was like, well, why wouldn't I talk to the president of Mexico? They're just a person.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, of course they're just a person, but I'm a little nervous. I would
Yeah.
be quite nervous to be talking to some presidents right now. Um, and so there's this unifying
Yeah.
um, perspective change that comes, and barriers that you had previously held
Mm.
now all of a sudden just go away.
Yeah. Jolt of courage for sure. I'm guessing after you do something like that, you fear very little.
Exactly. What's there to lose?
Right. Yeah. There's a new horizon to climb, and that's probably about it. So, of course, there have been over the last decade, especially probably really more like over the last 5 years, there have been so many fascinating discoveries. In space travel, in space, uh, people going up, people getting stuck, which sounds like
Hmm.
actually doesn't sound so bad to me, but I'll let others chime in on that. Um, you actually talked about when we first started talking, you talked about Mars. So, what are some exciting things that you're seeing? Of course, Artemis is getting ready to go. Mars is on lots of people's topic list when it comes to space. What about you?
Well, first I want to touch on that space is in the news,
Mm.
like you've mentioned. And I think that's actually the biggest change that
Mhm.
I've seen in the last like 2 years. Because before space was very, held to the side, people weren't really interested. Why is this important? Was
Mhm.
always brought
Sure.
up, which, is an understandable question. But we've got a lot of new launches, we've got new discoveries, we've got people talking about space. And that for me is actually the most important change that has
Mhm.
happened. We need everyone at the table because not just for conversation, but um, the international world needs to shape what outer space looks like.
Yeah.
Right now, we've got bodies that are deciding all kinds of different norms and policy and regulation. And I think everyone needs to be a part of that discussion.
Absolutely. And what has you so excited about Mars? I'll go back to that. You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, Mars is tricky. Mars is really tricky. A lot of people have it set for, the first place that we're
Mhm.
going to create a colony.
Right?
It's really, really hard. It's not an easy place, People, we can create a problem for everything or a
Yeah.
solution for every problem. Sorry. But Mars just has problem after problem after problem, and problems that are not compatible with life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really interested to see how we're going to approach this
Yeah.
as a species. Do we want to create an off-world habitat? Do we want to be growing things on another planet? Something that's really interesting to me is we've got some companies that are looking at growing things off planet, plants, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking at growing plants on the moon, to be one
Sure.
day on a colony. But something that they've kind of forgotten about is a lot of people believe that plants have, a spirit to them that
Mm.
are alive. And so, say a conversation that's been had with a lot of Indigenous peoples is how are we doing this? And is it right to be taking living things off planet
Interesting.
to be really, isolated to
Yeah.
grow just for our benefit? Is
Mm.
there any ethical issues that are coming up?
Wow, that's an interesting conversation. Yes, and it reminds me of The Martian, one of my favorite movies.
A
And
classic.
it's so good. You talked about some challenges, not only with just one or, the moon, Mars, anything like that, but just we've seen, I think, 10, 15 years ago, of course, SpaceX, when what they laid out would just seemed so ambitious. Now you're talking about space for humanity and really democratizing it because it's not only the aspect of anybody can go up. Theirs is more like if you have the money, you can go up. Yours is more like based on diversity and inclusion and impact, and you're a nonprofit. And so, what have some of the challenges been trying to get this idea off the ground as well? Literally.
Yeah, well, the price tag.
Yeah.
Because as you said, if you can pay, you can fly.
Hmm.
And we're trying to create equity there. And as a nonprofit, be able to, create that sponsored flight. But those seats are pricey.
Yeah.
And so we do have a number of providers that support us and have different initiatives. But at the end of the day, we're just also waiting for spaceflight to be more accessible because it is more affordable as well.
Sure. Absolutely. And there seem to be, we've touched on this a little bit so far, there's kind of two sides of the space travel conversation right now. One is probably more like you and me and the awe and wonder and the potential for an advancement. The other side is more focused on cost and how not just, can Jeff or Elon fund their own missions, but should that money be actually used here for people who need it on Earth? Why is this even happening when there are plenty of good causes down here? How do you guys chime in on the pro space conversation?
Yeah. And it's interesting too because I'm living in the part of the world that needs to have resources,
Hmm.
um, an influx of resources and support. And so it's hard living here to say, okay, I work in
Yeah.
the space industry, and they're like, look around you.
Yeah.
Why? Why? Well, I think it's important to know that this conversation is happening, this advancement is happening, and we want everyone, as I just talked about, everyone at the table, right? There's so many resources, and space is set to be $1 trillion industry.
Mm.
So we don't want that just in the hands of a few because that's what it will look like
Right.
inevitably.
Yeah.
And those resources, we don't, well, you guys were busy with other problems. And so we just had a few, folks from the Western world managing these resources.
Hmm.
No, we need everyone to be part of the conversation now. There's a lot in terms of sustainability. If you're sending something to space, it better
Right.
be reusable,
Yeah.
right? Lessons that we can be learning here on Earth in terms of sustainability, reusability, technology being a support.
Mm.
Um, and so I think that it's important that as we're taking one step off Earth, that we're also using all of the technology and initiatives here on Earth at the exact same time. I really don't want us to be looking forward without, really looking at what our needs are, today, right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it, can we talk about some of what the two women have gone up so far? Can we talk about some of what their impact, future impact is, or is that still a secret?
Oh no, this
Oh,
is
okay.
this is no secret. This is
Okay.
no secret at all. And so you've got Katia Ecazarreta, the first Mexican-born woman. She has created a foundation, and she's doing learning initiatives, really doing a lot with policy making in Mexico, so that young people who look at her as an inspiration, and that's also a
Yeah.
huge one.
Yeah.
Waves of people now see themselves going to space. But she's creating actual tangible ways for them to get involved in the space industry in Mexico.
Mm,
And so that has been huge. She's become a public figure. And, if you take a look at our Instagram, we share some of her stories. She's blossomed also in terms of what interests her, and she's in the fashion world, and she's on magazines, and she's been saying, you don't have to choose if you're in STEM. You don't have to erase part of your passions because it might not fit into this hyper masculine career choice that,
mhm.
unfortunately, STEM is it's very hard
Sure.
if you're a gender minority.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because so much of our conversation, it sounds like this futurist movement, but it's happening now. Your team is making it happen. What is some of the impact you've seen so far? Clearly, getting people up into space, big impact, big
Mhm.
goals. And you've started meeting those already, but I'm sure that you've had lots of applicants, lots of, just people interested in what you're doing. What are some of the impacts that you've seen across the spectrum?
Yes. So when I came on board to Space for Humanity, I wasn't the director of programs and I wasn't supporting in the Citizen Astronaut program.
Okay.
I was on the sidelines as interested as the next person.
Hmm.
And then I slowly supported, and I saw that my background in inclusion was helpful for selection. My background in pedagogy and in creating learning was helpful in preparing people for space travel. And so, I come at this as, someone on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
And each round, I see changes in the applicants.
Mm.
And when we put in and we said, okay, we need leadership, we need community development, and we need impact. Those are very, um, we've got so many different ways that you can
Yeah.
show markers for those. But what I saw was that people said, I'm interested in going to space, but more importantly, I'm interested in changing the world.
Mm.
And each year I will read so many applicants, thousands. And I've noted a few people and it kept tabs. And they're motivated to create this lasting change. Yeah, it helps their application for
Sure.
sure, but they're getting satisfaction from it. And
Mhm.
it's creating this momentum in and of itself.
Very cool.
And we like to give pointers and support people along their impact journey, as applicants. And we like to check in with people and motivate them that, like, hey, what you're doing is really amazing. So yes, we've got our Sarahs and our Katias of the world who, like I said, go on our Instagram, you'll see their impact
Yeah.
stories. But we've got thousands of people behind the scenes, our applicants who are creating lasting impact. And and that really motivates me every time
Yeah.
I dig into the applicant pool and take a look at what people are achieving.
That's very cool. What is coming? There's so much you've done already, but you're still a relatively new organization. So what can we expect what's coming in the future? What are the goals of the organization?
Well, we want to connect more with those applicants, with those thousands of people that have their eyes set on the skies and set on creating change. We want to get to know them, create communities surrounding them. I don't want to spill too many beans,
Yes.
but We're looking at doing more things than just individual space flight.
Okay.
Of course, we will always have our citizen astronaut program. There's nothing like it out there
Yeah.
in the world. And so we want to keep doing that. But we want to also motivate young learners, researchers, different people to democratize access to space as a whole.
Mhm. Very cool. Well, I'm excited to see what's next for sure. Thank you so much for your time. This was so fun. And as a fan of the organization, I'm delighted to connect with you and to chat and learn more about you personally, than just what I read online or your LinkedIn profile. You have a fascinating background, and then you're doing some pretty important things right now. So thank you for helping democratize space travel, which is just put that on a business card. That's pretty amazing. Um, but how can people connect with you? Of course, I'm sure after listening to this, we have more people that want to apply. So how do they do that? What's the best way to contact?
Yes, so keep an eye at Space Humanity on Instagram. And if you go to our website, spaceforhumanity.org, you can subscribe to our newsletter, see when applications open. I urge people to do that. I know that our two citizen astronauts, I kept hearing from them even like years later. They're like,
Uh,
I can't believe it was me. And so if you've got an iota of doubt, that's fine. That's normal.
mhm.
Keep applying. I urge you to also keep applying.
Yeah,
And you can find me at Universal Inclusion. I like to do updates on my socials, um, updates about program, about inclusion in the space industry as well.
very cool. And I would say universal inclusion pretty well sums it up as well, as you reach out. Well, thank you so much for your time, for being here. What a fascinating conversation. I appreciate all that your team is doing. Please thank them for us as well. And for everyone listening or watching, thank you so much for tuning in. We will have another terrific Logistics with Purpose conversation in 2 weeks. So be sure to hit subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. Bye bye.